Hi Ken, your last name is Vogel, so is it pronounced right?
So it is pronounced with a hard G, so it is Fogel.
Hmm.
And I know that my grandparents on my father's side emigrated from Germany between the First and Second World Wars.
Okay, but what was your first computer?
My first computer. It was something called a DigiComp,
Did
and
you?
I actually still own it. It
Uh-huh.
was a plastic computer,
Okay.
3-bit. It was sold by an old company called Edmund Scientific,
Okay.
and you programmed it by putting small pieces of plastic over pegs, and it was spring-loaded. And you could play basic games. You could learn how to do binary math. And that first computer I got when I was probably about 11 years old.
And you enjoy that?
I did, but I was frustrated because it was, I guess, akin to the really first generations of computers in the late 40s, early 50s, where, you had to flick a switch, set the ones and zeros manually.
Mhm.
And so, yes, you could play the game of NIM and a few other things, but I was frustrated. And I'll be honest, at that point in time, I thought it was a cute toy, but I didn't really see myself taking that route.
Okay. And was it somehow connected to a display, to a monitor or a TV set?
No, nothing at all. Nothing at all. I should have brought it in here. I still have it. It's still in the box. It was a toy.
Okay.
And then we jump ahead. So now that was probably early 60s. Now we're in the early 70s and I'm in college and I decide to take a course in Fortran.
Okay.
And these were the days of punch cards.
But there was
and
nothing
handing in a
between
deck.
between Digicomp
No.
and okay, interesting.
No, I became, well, I was involved in a range of other things, and but whatever. So I take this course in Fortran. And, my first problem was I never learned to type.
Okay.
I once took a typing course for the goal of meeting women, but I was so bad at it that I was bad at meeting women and I was bad at typing, so I never finished the course.
It was the great combination.
So here I am confronted with punch cards, and it just took forever to do anything. And there was no user interface. You were basically getting it to add numbers together and other silly things. And I did the course, I passed it and went, nah, this is not for me. So we move ahead now to 1980. I've just gotten married.
Okay.
And we drove a van. So in the 70s and 80s, vanning in North America was a big thing. You'd buy a small commercial van. I built a whole interior, a bed that folded out. It had a stove, fridge, the whole thing. And by 1980, it was rusting pretty badly. So we needed to have the rust removed. And at the same time, I was working at a job where I once calculated that I worked 20 minutes a day. But the nature of the work, I was a service person in a mailroom. They couldn't put me anywhere else just in case somebody came to the mailroom.
Okay.
So I needed something to do. So there was a magazine store nearby. And I started buying computer magazines, Creative Computing, Byte Magazine, Micro 6502. And I didn't understand any of it. Actually, I found the ads more instructional than the articles. And in the course of this, I came to the conclusion that I needed this new toy, right? The Digicomp didn't do it for me. Fortran didn't do it for me. But maybe this new generation of personal computer could. My choices were limited. There was the TRS-80. And even back then, we still called it the Trash 80. There was the TI-99. Which was an interesting computer because it was the first 16-bit computer from Texas Instrument, but it had a keyboard of chiclet keys. It was just a horrible keyboard. And then there was the Apple II Plus, the most expensive of the three, but it looked really cool.
Question, where was it in California, your mailroom?
Oh, no, it was here in Montreal. It was at a junior college.
Oh, okay.
I was working at a college then called Vanier College.
Okay.
And so that was my mailroom.
Okay.
So
what was the relation between your van and the mailroom?
Yes, that's where we're coming to. So I've come to the conclusion I want to buy one of these things. And it's going to cost me in 1980 about $2,000.
Canadian.
So clearly I'd just been married. We were going to have to borrow money. So what my wife and I decided to do was we would borrow $5,000 from the bank.
Okay.
$3,000 to get rid of the rust from the van and $2,000 for this really cool toy.
Okay.
And I cannot say enough about my wife. You know, we'd been together for a few years. We just got married. And the fact that she supported this exorbitant expense to buy a computer. So I buy this Apple II.
But
first of all, I got to get the maximum memory.
Wait a sec. But your computer was still less expensive than removing rust from the car.
Yes. It was $2,000 and the rest was $3,000.
Yeah.
So
why was it so expensive to remove the rust?
Cars at that point in time, the metal was not properly treated.
Okay.
So the bottom, say 18 inches, completely around the car, all the side panels had just dissolved.
Okay.
So it was a big job. So I want to buy an Apple. And the other reason I bought an Apple back then was as I went to computer stores, there were maybe 2 or 3 stores that sold Apples. And there were always owners hanging out at the store, even after buying it, just to talk about, what new software, how we did this. People love sharing information. But when I went to a Radio Shack store, I wasn't sure if the employees there knew how to turn it on. And as for the Texas Instrument, it was just weird. And again, I never met anybody who owned one. Oh, and then there was the Commodore PET. I learned something important from a Commodore PET. Never use cassette tape for programs. I had my landlord own the Commodore PET, and he would invite me to look at all this amazing software. And he would have to load these cassette tapes 4 or 5 times before they loaded up.
Yeah.
So I discovered Apple sold floppy disk drives for only $700. I could get a floppy disk that held 100K. This was like mind-blowing back then.
Okay.
So I bought an Apple II. I added 32K of memory. I had 48K of memory.
But there's a missing piece.
Yes.
Because if you bought the Apple, you couldn't program, right? Because you just read the magazine. So
nothing.
Why you knew that you need, a floppy disk and not cassettes? I mean...
it was all about performance. When I would, watch my landlord work with his Commodore PET, he spent more time loading software than running it.
Okay.
And so that it became very clear to me that this thing called a floppy disk.
Yeah, but I had also cassettes, and my programs load fast because they were small, But loading a game was a different story. It took sometimes 20 minutes. But I know a small basic program, it was like, 2 minutes, I guess. So it was not even, or 1 minute. It was like almost there.
But, with a floppy disk, even on an Apple II, it was more like 15 seconds. It really made a difference.
Sure.
So, the 48K Apple, right? I had more memory, the maximum. That was 1,300. The drive was 700. Oh, I forgot. There's probably tax in there as well. And I bring this thing home, and quite literally within hours, I become obsessed with it. I've got all these magazines. I'm typing in any program I can find. And back then it was AppleSoft Basic, which was actually written by Microsoft. The first language on an Apple was called Integer Basic, which from its name tells you it had problems with floating point numbers. And then Jobs and Wozniak actually, hired Bill Gates and his small company to write a floating point basic for their new machine. And so, I just went crazy. I was working back then as a photography technician, and I would come home and just spend every waking hour, if I wasn't at work, I was teaching myself to program.
Why?
This was like anything I could imagine, I could make happen.
Yeah.
Right? I got into the graphics aspect. And I also, by the end of about the first year, I realized I had to learn assembly language because BASIC was just too slow. When I looked at commercial games and I saw how they performed and learned that they were all written in assembly language back then, I had to teach myself that.
Was easy for you to teach yourself, programming basic? So was it
Yes.
Okay.
I can't tell you why. I had magazines, books. I didn't, the concepts, the flow made sense to me.
Okay.
And so I got more and more into it. And then one day at DOScon, I'm now working at another college. I'm working at DOScon College in Montreal.
Mm-hmm.
And one day the college decides, so we're looking at 1982, 83, they're going to go out and buy Apple computers for the college.
Mm-hmm.
The choice then was Apple or IBM PCs, but IBM PCs were even more expensive than Apple's. So the college decided we're going to go with Apple's. And then they looked internally to see if there was any employee at the college who had any experience. And that led them to me. And so they invited me to give a presentation on the Apple to the faculty. First time I'd ever stood in front of anybody and made a presentation. And I made this presentation, and I think it went well because 2 weeks later, they hired me to teach non-credit courses.
Okay.
Introduction to word processing, how to use an Apple.
What does it mean, non-credit courses?
So if you're going for a diploma from a college, a university, these are called credit courses.
Mm-hmm.
To graduate, you need so many credits.
Okay.
An undergraduate degree in Montreal is 90 credits, for instance.
Okay.
Now, to teach credit courses, you needed qualification.
Mm-hmm.
I didn't have any qualification. So they hired me to teach non-credit. This was actually a money-making activity for the college. College was funded by the government, but by offering courses that were not under the government auspices. They weren't controlled by the Ministry of Education. The college could make some cash on the side.
Okay.
And so they hired me to teach that. And colleges still do that. As a matter of fact, to this day, I still teach non-credit at a university.
Okay, which course?
Intro to that.
You.
So I give this presentation. The next thing you know, I'm starting to teach.
What you are teaching right now? I'm just curious.
So I retired a year ago, but in the end, I was responsible for the final year project courses. We would do desktop projects based on JavaFX, and then we would do server-side programming using J2EE then and JSF.
Okay.
So I get involved, and then I get involved with the local Montreal Apple Corps. I get involved in one of the first user groups in the city. And then one day, I get a call from an engineering firm in Toronto, Ontario, telling me that they're installing a new water filtration system in a plant in Montreal, and they've decided they want to control it with Apple IIs. Mm-hmm. And they need somebody to write the graphical user interface. Mm-hmm. And they were offering kind of more money than I ever imagined I would ever get in one sitting. Mm-hmm. And so, as I've done many times in my career, I said yes to something I had no idea how to do. And within 2 months, they were running this really cool system. You could see the valves in the filtration system. They could pick a valve, open and close it. They wrote the control side. I was only responsible for the user interface. Mm-hmm. And based on that contract, I said, okay, enough working for anyone. I quit my job at DOScon College. And as they say, I put up my shingle. I was already starting to teach 3 nights a week. And then the work started coming in. One of my strangest tasks, back in the late 70s, early 80s, word processing was primarily done on dedicated machines. Mm-hmm. There was the MyCom word processor from Philips. Heck, mm-hmm. Even Exxon, the oil company, had a word processing division. Mm-hmm. So I worked for a firm where they would deliver the equipment to me. I had specialized hardware to read 8-inch discs, hard-sectored, soft-sectored. I would have to analyze each of the disks and discover how the word processors coded things like left justification, right, bold, font changes. And then, in of all languages, PL1, that was the requirement of the client, I had to write translators. Mm-hmm. To and from. So where were we going to? Well, WordPerfect. WordPerfect. WordStar, Multimate from IBM. And I did that for 3 years, writing software of this nature. PL1, a typical compile on an IBM PC with a 5 megabyte hard disk. So now we're up to 1985. That would take about 20 minutes. But it was, I learned a lot about how to structure software, how to organize it. And then that contract ended, and, it was one contract after the other. And I was having a great time. I was working at home, right? I never worked for a company. I was the contractor. And in 1990, I get a call from the computer science credit program at Dawson College. One of their teachers is taking a sudden leave of absence, and they need somebody to fill in full time. So I'm sitting there going, well, typically teachers at a college are supposed to have a master's degree. And I never even finished college. So I said yes. And later on discovered a loophole in the regulations that allowed them to bring me in. But still, so I said yes, and I became a full-time computer science instructor. I was teaching what were called complementary courses. Okay. Intro to programming in C or Pascal, intro to word processing. These were courses that students outside the program in other disciplines would take. So I did my year, I filled in, and then they said, thanks a lot, goodbye. Cool. Left, picked up more contracts. Then a year later, they reached out again and said, how'd you like to do this forever? And at this point, the problem with being a contractor was you were never quite sure where your next contract was going to be. I had a young family, 2 children. I was looking for some stability. And as I like to refer to the 3 reasons for becoming a teacher, I don't know if you're familiar with them, June, July, and August, the 3 months you don't have to work. So I said, yes, I want to be a full-time instructor. And within 2 years, I received, don't think of it in the university sense, I received tenure, but that was more administrative. There was no research or anything involved. So I've never called myself a professor, but I now had a, guaranteed position teaching computer science. And this was in a department that was Cobol oriented. The program at Dawson College turned out Cobol students. But the faculty knew the world was changing.
One question. Did you actually enjoy PL1? Because you had experience with BASIC and with assembler or assembly, and now you learned PL1 and Cobol.
I really did like it, and my knowledge of PL1 went a long way to helping me understand and work with C. Even though technically C is a smaller language, has a much more compact syntax than PL1 did, it certainly introduced me to the concept of structured programming, right? The idea that you write methods, and each method should, as much as possible, just do one thing. And that's what PL1 gave me. I'm at Dawson College now. I'm starting to teach C programming, then C++. And
so how PL1 looks like? It's like functions, and is this more like C? So it's like Java with
PL1 is more like C, but the core library is much larger.
Okay.
Right, than C. So the transition, PL1, it was a strange PL1 to have it run on an IBM PC. It was a mainframe language developed by IBM. But a company called Digital Research created a compiler for IBM PCs under DOS.
Okay.
Things evolve. I'm learning other languages. And then one day, nobody in the department wants to be the chair anymore. And I go, oh, this could be something cool. So for 25 years, I was the chairperson of the computer science technology program. I would teach fewer courses, so that's how I could specialize. I did my courses in the 3rd year, the project courses, and the rest of the time I was in charge of paperwork. And I got a chance to interact with students at new levels. In the college system in Quebec, a chairperson is the person between the academic administration and the faculty. The faculty wants something, they come to me, I go to admin. Admin wants the faculty to do something, they come to me, and I pass it on. And I have to say, although that kind of arrangement could go badly, My experiences working with college administrators were always good. My experience working with the faculty were always good. And I got to teach what I enjoyed most, which was the project courses. Now, in 2000, so I've already been chair for 4 years. In 2000, the department decides it's time to say goodbye to Cobol. And we can blame IBM for that. So in 1999, I get in touch with the IBM rep, and I say, we can't afford mainframe time for our students. Our budgets have been cut. If you want us to keep teaching Cobol, give us a mainframe. We'll find staff to run it, but we can't buy it. Well, they kind of laughed at us and said, no, we only sell these things. So we made the decision to drop the mainframe. What do we replace it with? Well, in 2000, we had two choices. There was .NET, which was just coming out. And then, of course, there was Java. And I had already started teaching Java at Concordia University, the non-credit. And what I loved about Java in 2000 was I didn't care what computer my students had. Right? When I had to teach C, it was like, okay, we're all using Windows, right?
But when you started with
Java,
Java,
Visual Studio
in 2000, when you started with Java, 2000 was already late.
2000.
Okay.
Well, actually, I probably started in 99 and then brought my experience teaching non-credit to the department. And as the discussion went back and forth, I said, we have to go with Java. We have to remove the hardware from the equation of learning coding.
Then it was JavaOne too, right?
Yeah, it was 1.2 was the first version I worked
They're
with.
already
And let me tell
sophisticated
you,
Java, right?
Yeah, when 1.4 came out, this was like the most amazing thing.
Yeah.
Right? 1.4 finally sealed it up nice and clean. So we discussed and we decided to go with Java, which involved, we actually hired instructors to bring the faculty up to speed, right? You've spent your whole career doing Cobol and suddenly you're told, okay, next week you're doing Intro to Java. It was a big transition, but it was exciting. And in 2003, IBM calls me up. And the conversation is, where do we want the mainframe delivered? Turns out IBM noticed that schools across the world were dropping Cobol from the curriculums. And they suddenly were running out of Cobol programmers. And so I said, thanks, but no thanks. You missed the boat. We're a Java shop now. And it's interesting how, for much of what's happening at IBM, they're a big Java shop now. So
I would tell them back then, just deliver a couple of ThinkPads to my students, right? Because ThinkPads, the IBM ThinkPads were great. This was like a dream machine back then, you remember? I wanted to have one. So as well, like I had one. I think 2003 I got one, but they were that much better than any other laptops. So it was crazy.
Yeah. Yeah, they really did build good hardware.
Yeah.
Their software, let's remember, what was it, the PS2 and that whole nonsense?
But the IBM's Java back then was really quick and fast. And they had, I don't know whether you remember the DeveloperWorks from IBM and the AlphaWorks website. And the Geeks compiler, which was crazy fast, was also from IBM. Not always correct, but at least fast. So they did interesting work back then. I also remember.
They definitely did. But, this was also the time when Microsoft decided to make some subtle changes to Java. And so that cost them a few $1 million. Yeah. And actually, it probably drove the development of .NET because Microsoft recognized the significance of virtual machines to manage programs. And when back then Sun wouldn't let them modify Java to meet, Microsoft's needs. They then brought in the developers who built Turbo Pascal for Borland to develop the .NET platform.
Yes.
So an interesting time in history. So at that point, I just got involved with Java, again, projects, Java Enterprise. I can remember...
But what is
interesting? I always had to,
What is the story with IBM? So they told you, where to deliver the mainframe. You said, okay, thank you, not. And there was any relation with IBM, or we just
no? They never got back to us or anything again.
Okay.
I can tell you one more little side note to that. A couple of years ago, we're meeting with human resources from the Canadian federal government, They want to talk to us about hiring our students. So great. We're talking about what their skill set are, Java and so on. And the government people say, oh, that's fine. But would your students be interested if we hired them and sent them to a Cobol training program and then paid them $10,000 more a year for learning Cobol? Would they do it? And we said, well, of course they will. It's $10,000 more. So that's how desperate governments were. They still have, and there still exists so much Cobol software.
When was it?
This discussion with the federal government would have been in 2016.
Okay.
So it's not that long ago. It's 6 years ago. And it's still an issue, right? They will pay bonuses to anybody who works in IT for the federal government to go off and do
Hey,
Cobol
Ken,
training.
now it's your time, right? Now you can become, the PL1 rockstar and Cobol rockstar as well. Just forget about Java. You have to remember the old days.
Yeah. So no, I love Java. I love the fact that, I could walk into a classroom carrying a Mac or a PC.
But which IDE you used back then? What was your favorite IDE back then?
So the first one we used was something from Oracle called JDeveloper.
Yeah, it was JBuilder based. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Well, there was JBuilder, which was a really good one, but you had to pay for it. But we could get the Oracle product for free, and we could use that. We had looked at another product from Sun that eventually became NetBeans.
Java Workshop was Java Workshop, Sun Java Workshop, and Sun Studio.
Something like that. But it was very much into this, what I would call the excessive multiple document interface.
Yeah, exactly. Mm-hmm.
So you'd have all these little windows all over your screen.
Yeah, exactly.
And it just made no sense.
Yeah.
So we used JDeveloper for a while, and then we moved to Eclipse. Mm-hmm. And Eclipse was an experience. It did its job, but there was never a class where I would have to tell my students, okay, now build a new project, new workspace. Copy all your code from the old workspace to the new workspace.
Yeah.
And then open it and it'll work again. Mm-hmm. Now, those kind of issues are long gone. But it was frustrating.
Yeah.
And that frustration led me to Netbeans.
Exactly. Mm-hmm.
Because Netbeans, it didn't seem to have as many features or whatever, but it just worked. Mm-hmm. Right?
Exactly.
You weren't, confronted with strangeness, and its integration with Maven was just stunning back then.
Yeah. Which version you
better
started
than what
with?
Eclipse did.
Which version of Netbeans you started with? Which was the first version?
I probably started with, I don't know if it was 3 or 4.
Okay, I started with 5. Prior to 5, it was for me not usable because they had a strange concept of class path, I remember. You had to mount jars, which was strange. And with 5, it was really great. And I think with 5, they supported Java EE 5. And with NetBeans 6, there was like complete refactoring, which makes NetBeans faster and prettier and better. So I really enjoyed NetBeans then. Mm-hmm.
Yeah. It could have been 5 I started with, that's all the distant path now, but it just worked.
Yeah.
And so I started writing a bit about it. Everybody needed a blog. So, I bought a domain and put up a blog. And one day I get a message through LinkedIn from the manager of the NetBeans project, Geertjan.
Oh, okay.
And he says to me, would I like to collaborate with him on a article about Java and NetBeans? So I was flattered and I said, sure. And then I didn't get back to him for like 9 months. But by this point, I'd already published a few articles on my blog site about why I love NetBeans and so on. And so I guess it was 2014, 2014, he invites me to JavaOne. Mm-hmm. He says, we're going to have a panel discussion. That'll get your ticket into the conference. Mm-hmm. All you got to do is get funding to get out to San Francisco. Mm-hmm. Well, as a teacher, I had access to what's called professional development funding. Mm-hmm. So I got the schools to pay my travel and accommodation. And I went to JavaOne. And it was just, suddenly there were all these people. And I suspect we probably met the first time at that first JavaOne. Mm-hmm. And, that's what people wanted to talk about. I don't mean to sound insulting, but this was geek heaven.
Yeah.
Right? You could just stop anybody in the hall. You'd be on the escalator and suddenly you'd turn around and be discussing, the significance of this structure in a JSP or, what collection is best. And I'd never come across that. My department continued to struggle with Java. I was crazy about it.
But it's a little bit pity because it was 2014. This was already the Oracle's JavaOne.
Yes.
So if you would, the origin one was even better. So I would say, this was a little bit, it would be,
And then I got invited back. Well, I got invited to another panel discussion the following year. And then for the last 3 years, so from 17, 18, and 19, I actually submitted sessions.
Uh-huh.
And that's how I got in. Though I have to admit, I've been told I'm not the only person this has ever happened to, but I think people were being nice to me. I once gave a session that no one attended. It was an evening session, 8 p.m.
Okay.
They used to call these birds of a feather.
Yeah. And
I wanted to talk about teaching Java. And I remember being in the room. And of course, you're in a room that seats like 250 people. And nobody came.
Oh.
And after about 15 minutes, I remember the technician at the back of the room comes up to me and I say, well, I think we're going to close up shop now. And she puts her arm around me and she says, there's a cannabis store across the street. I said, thank you, but no thank you. And then I leave, and then I get a phone call from Oracle going, where are you? You're not in your room. And I said, nobody showed up. And they went, oh, sorry, bye-bye. Now, my other sessions were attended, and I was happy, but I really loved speaking. I loved the opportunities, to do that. And then in 2018, I think it was 2018, I came back from JavaOne and I said, we need to do something like this in Montreal.
Okay.
We need a Java conference. So initially I said, why don't I hold a Netbeans Day? Actually, let's go back. It's 2017. So let's have a Netbeans Day. And I reach out to a number of people. And this is kind of last minute. I'm in San Francisco late September, and I want to hold this conference in January before classes begin at the college. So there's no students in the building yet. I go to the college administration and I say, I'm going to need space. I'm going to need this. I'm going to need money. And the college went, this sounds great. Sure, it's all yours. Isn't going to cost you anything. We'll cover all your expenses. So now I got to find people to speak. Well, again, it's late. So we decide, we'll have a bunch of people speak online. We had that first year, I guess about 60 people came. The online was an absolute disaster. People didn't have fast enough internet. And after that first year, I said, we're never doing this online again.
Okay.
So then I started reaching out. So our call for proposals was, I said, hey, you want to come to Montreal? And people said yes. Venkat came 3 years in a row. Pratik, who was working at IBM. I mean, people wanted to come to Montreal. Josh Long from VMware in Spring. People were coming in from Hilmer from Columbia. Were coming to Montreal. And in the last year that we ran it live before the pandemic in 2019, we had over 500 people attend the conference. We had 3 sessions going on simultaneously.
What was the name of the conference?
It was called DOScon in the end.
DOScon, okay.
So it was Netbeans Day for the first 2 years, and then we changed it to DOScon. And we were looking for other topics. So in the last year, we had a local company that does mobile apps using .NET. So they gave a presentation. I was trying to get some Python people. Then the pandemic. So in 2020, I decide, okay, let's do this online. And it actually worked. And then one day, I get an email from a company called Geekle. Geekle. They're running conferences on a range of topics, and they're inviting me to speak at their conference. And I go, oh, that's cool. I'm flattered. Problem is, you have to pay to listen to me speak, but they are offering me nothing more than fame for speaking. There's no payment, there's no nothing, right? Yet they're doing this as a commercial version. And I was a little upset, right? I looked at Oracle. Oracle gave me my free ticket. right? That was worth what? Back then, $1,500 for the week in San Francisco?
Mm-hmm.
Cool. That was my payment for contributing to their success. But these Geekle people were offering me nothing. So I said, well, and I discussed this on the Java Champions list. I said, why don't we have our own conference? Why don't we have a conference of Java champions speaking on topics? It'll be all online. We found a good platform for it. And yeah, the champions were excited. We had a call for proposals. And so I think the first one was in, let's see, we had one this year, 2022. 2021 was the first year.
Okay.
Everything is on YouTube. And right now we're up to over 70,000 views of the sessions from the first 2 years. And that getting involved with running the conference at Dawson got me actually on the radar. The DOScon led me to being, submitted as a Java champion. And I got that, title. And it was funny because the year I became a Java champion at Java Code one of my presentations was a bit of comedy, why there are more Java villains than Java champions. And it was an ode to bad code.
Okay.
And I had a lot of fun. I mean, I had people laughing, and I keep thinking I should do that again. There's some really good bad code out there.
Yeah.
And so, of course, then after doing this, I become a Java champion. So that poses a problem. I can't be a Java villain anymore. Though I think if you go to javavillain.com, I still own that domain, you'll find a picture of Snidely Whiplash, who was a villain from cartoons in the 1950s.
Okay.
He's our symbol, but that's all that's on the page. So I just got involved more with the community. And then somebody said to me, why don't you get on the JCP executive committee? So I said, oh, this sounds interesting. So I ran for election and I won.
Wow.
And I was filling in for somebody, and then I won a second time. So I'm actually in the third year on the JCP EC. And I bring this up because one of the things I've done on the EC is to reinvigorate the concept of Java in education. That is what I'm trying to focus on now. How do we encourage schools to use Java? We've seen this movement towards Python. Nice language. I have nothing bad to say about it. But I don't think good careers are based on Python. And I'm more interested in my local market here. I know that every major enterprise in this city is Java-based, to a lesser extent .NET. All the banks, all the major engineering firms, everybody's doing Java. And that's where the work was. And it remains that way. But too many people perceive Java as difficult, verbose. We all want typeless languages. And, I remember typeless languages. That was AppleSoft Basic. A equals 4 or A equals Bob.
The cool story is, also Twitter is not always, easy to... So with the algorithmic timeline is the problem in Twitter. And someone wrote a post like, what's your opinion about TypeScript? Or are you using TypeScript? And I answered because I thought they're asking me, but this was just a random tweet. So my answer was, I'm just using ECMAScript, which is just standard, and with Visual Studio Code you get almost like TypeScript behavior, and then the storm started. How I can say it, JavaScript is not type safe, and without types you cannot work, and you should use TypeScript to have types. And my answer is, what are you talking about? I'm a Java developer. As I'm just using JavaScript on the side, but 80% of code I'm writing is a Java code. But they were absolutely convinced that JavaScript is not usable. And you have to use TypeScript in order to have types, which is funny, because as JavaScript started, the entire argumentation was, we would like to have JavaScript or Ruby, and we don't need types because we can move faster with unit tests. And Java is just, slow because to program and not very effective because you have to care about compilation and types. So this was actually funny for me, or interesting, because this is the whole circle. Now I was on Twitter and I have to justify myself why I'm not using types, and I use types all the time. But the entire argumentation 5 years ago is skip Java. Types are stupid. Just go to JavaScript. You don't need types. And Python is also interesting. What happens with Python and the typing? I expect in a few years someone will invent, typed Python, and then say, okay, you cannot use Python. You have to just type Python, and Java is just too bloated or whatever, right? So that's this. What I'm assuming is, if something is working in IT, developers become bored and they are searching for new challenges. And this is how new languages or old languages become reinvented again. So, for instance, even before the project starts, I get questions to know, should we use Kotlin? Should we use Scala? And so, yeah, but why not Java? I mean, this is really a problem. Java 17 is great. I mean, if we just start using Java, no external dependencies, we can start right away. And say, yeah, but, it's like, what but? Give me just a reason. And actually, there was never a reason. It's more like, but you would like to try something else. So, okay, I would say in a commercial project, just use whatever works, right? So just, use the most boring technology you can get and go ahead. But if you are, your hobby project is a completely different story. So I'm really curious how Python, what happens with Python in a few years. Maybe the same like JavaScript and TypeScript, right?
It's hard to say. It's funny. I had to do some research on Visual Studio Code, VS Code, and learning how it's created. And it's actually written in TypeScript.
Yeah. Cool.
So I went, TypeScript. I wonder how does that relate to JavaScript? And to my absolute surprise, I discovered that TypeScript is first compiled into JavaScript.
Yeah.
And then run. So there really isn't, a true TypeScript language.
No, it's transpiled. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly. That surprised me. But it's also in this particular area, the idea that there are people who are, Java's old. Here's where I think the 6-month cadence, the now every 2 years for an LTS, that excites me. One of my little things is I miss the switch case from Visual Basic 6.
Okay, what is it?
I actually did commercial programming in VB6. And I was thinking about it the other day. And so here we're in the mid-'80s, and it had a 1 megabyte runtime, which was considered excessive, huge 1 megabyte, right? Especially if you had a 640K machine. But what it had was the most amazing switch, because in a case, you could do anything. You could do comparisons, ifs. I loved it, right? I almost never had to use if. And the recent pattern matching. I've been playing with the pre-release of Java 19, and, there's my switch again. Cases can now be complex decision-making statements rather than just equals. And that excites me. That capability isn't common in other languages. And we're seeing more exciting things. Well, there's, obviously threads everybody's excited about, new access to native memory. Java is evolving. It is becoming friendlier. But where the problem is that many programmers who learned Java 5 years ago, 10 years ago, heck, I learned it 40 years ago, they're still programming the same way.
Yeah.
Right? So when they see these new features and they go, well, wait a minute, the old way worked, but you're missing the point here. Yeah. These are better ways of doing, yes, the same thing. And you have to evolve with the language. And if you don't, you're right. People start looking at Python or Kotlin or Scala or any of the other languages to get that, I need something new fix. What they're really saying is, I enjoyed writing bad code for so many years before I figured it out. I want to do that again with a different language.
What are you doing exactly as an SC, executive JCP member? So you are, what are the tasks exactly? So you are
basically every JSR or JEP is approved of by the committee.
Okay.
So we review the documents, and if we have any comments, I remember there was one that came up and I was puzzled why it had not been completed yet, but it was more than 10 years old. It had to do with real time. And I remember questioning. I said, really, 10 years? Maybe we should just retire it? Wow. The people involved wrote a long justification for why they, sorry it took us this long, but we had to get it right. But we got a good explanation. So that's a big part of what the JCP does.
Okay.
My general feeling is if it gets to the JCP, people far smarter than me have reviewed it and, recognize that this is significant and this will work. So we're like, I guess, the final proofreaders.
Okay.
Just to make sure it's going to make sense.
But interesting task. I mean, you learn a lot, and you see, what's coming, right?
Exactly. And then my latest activities, as we move on, I just finished my first, what I hope will be a long series of videos for A-Press and Springer, learning to program in Java. And so the first video is now up on their system. I've also just begun writing a book for Pact. I'm in the middle of chapter 3 now, called Transitioning to Java.
Okay.
So I started off wanting to write a how to program Java for absolute beginners. And what O'Reilly told me, A-Press told me, and even Pact told me was, we have enough of those. So in my discussion with Pact, I said, well, let's take a different approach. Let's not write a book for somebody who's never programmed before. Let's write a book for someone who's already coding in a language other than Java. So I don't have to spend 2 chapters explaining what a variable is. What I can do is talk about how Java deals with variables, what the Java syntax is, what are the patterns involved. And Pact went, yeah, that sounds good. And I remember they said to me, okay, what do you figure, about 800 pages? And I went, no, I was going for 200 pages. I'm not a fan of books, these huge books. I'd rather have 5 smaller books than one big book. And I have to credit Pact. You know, when I made this presentation and I knew what they really wanted, and that wasn't what I was going to do for them, they went, okay, yes, let's do that. And so, you know, first 2 chapters have gone through editorial and they're happy. Actually, chapter 3 is Maven.
Okay.
Right? And, you know, I believe that if you're coming to Java, you know, there's the basics, right? The JDK and that. But you're building software. This idea of you're compiling, linking, no. That's old. You're building software. You need to deal with build tools. You've got Maven, you've got Gradle, and some others out there, the old Ant. So this is the type of book that I'm writing for them, and I'm hoping it'll be out in January.
Great idea. So you spent the entire summer, writing a book.
Well, that's it. And I retired in June 2021.
How you retired? You are the CGCP, you are writing a book, you are recording a series of videos. Exactly what I'm doing, actually. And I'm not retired, right?
So in some respects, I'm back to what I was doing in the 80s.
Yeah, exactly.
I'm a freelance contractor.
Back to the future.
Yeah, exactly. And I'm for sale. Make me an offer.
Exactly. So if people would like to hire you for teaching or courses or just contract work, they can just do it, right?
That's it, exactly. Right?
Even for Cobol, if you pay you 20,000 more, you will do Cobol work, right?
Well, you see, I was the one member of the department back in the 80s, or actually in the 90s when I started, who didn't know Cobol.
Oh, then Peel 1.
And I remember, one day when they give you what courses you're teaching, they gave me Intro to Cobol. And I actually was excited because, hey, it's about as much as I could learn quickly. And I was curious, I thought this would be great. And at the last minute, they gave it to somebody else and gave me a C course instead.
Okay.
Because they knew that was my strength. So no, I'm not going to be teaching Cobol, but, like many old timers, there was BASIC, there was assembly language, PL1, there was Visual Basic, Pascal, did a lot of work for Pascal.
So, but people can hire you to transition from something to Java, right?
That's it. And that's where this book that I'm working on is about, So I'm having fun. I'm sitting here in an office come studio. I'm terribly vain, so I have to make sure I look good.
Yeah, you look pretty. So it's perfect.
But, to me, life is about having a good time.
Exactly.
And software has been the challenge that I needed. And teaching people to program. So I recognize that I'm not the brilliant programmer. I'm not going to write the next framework for server side.
But this is actually not necessary. I would say what's really required is just to write simple code. This is the requirement, not necessary to be a brilliant programmer. I mean.
Yeah. And, in terms of my teaching, one of the things that has been very important to me is how my students organize their code. I give my students, so I meet them for the very first time in the third year of this 3-year program. It's their desktop project, and I give them a program I need them to write for me. Right? I give them a mathematical formula, and I say, write me an interactive program that will ask the user for 4 inputs, do the calculation, and present the answer. Show me what you can do. And it was sad. The number of students who used what I refer to as the stream of consciousness pattern. That means you write all the code in main as you think of it. The lack of structure. At most I expected one class and a decently structured program. Here's some input, here's some process, here's some output. So I got students who handed me in programs that gave the correct answer, and I failed them. There were no comments. There was no structure to it. And that's what I have focused on in the classroom, right? My students are pretty smart, right? But the idea that you have to organize your software. It has to be, set in a different way. How do what becomes a class? Unit testing. I tell my students, your program doesn't work until it passes the unit tests. And if you don't have unit tests, then we can declare your program never worked.
An offer. What we should do, I will invite you again and just to talk about teaching. How to teach Java. So this is what you should do.
I would love to do that. I have some opinions that are a little off, a little strange.
I also have some opinions, and this would be interesting, heated discussion, I would say.
I would look forward to it.
Perfect. So where people can find you on the internet, how the people can hire you, and what is the exact name of the book if they would like to pre-order it?
Okay, so you can find me. I use the handle on Twitter at OmniProf, OMNIPROF. You can email me, omniprof@gmail. My blog site, which is getting a little stale, is Omni Java. And the company that I had when I freelanced was called Omnibus Systems. That's why I put Omni in front of everything.
Okay.
I just saw Omnifish. Some people from another developer have decided to support Glassfish better. So I saw Omni again. So I said, hey, if you need another Omni, I'm available. So they can reach me there. I'm on Facebook. I'm on LinkedIn. Just type in my name. You'll find me. I just love to talk. I'm trying to find conferences that will pay me to visit them.
Okay.
I've made some submissions. I don't have the funding from the college anymore or anywhere, but if somebody thinks I have something worth listening to, I'm willing to travel now. And yeah, I just teaching people to program and seeing the result, taking students who don't know, they put everything in main or every method does 6 or 7 things. And we finished with an e-commerce project at the end. And in that e-commerce project, they're writing 150 classes, right? Every public method unit tested, right? My focus at Dawson has always been about preparing them for the workforce. What does it mean to be a professional developer? And I'd love to talk more about it with you someday.
Exactly. This will be the title of our next episode. What does it mean to be a professional developer?
Yeah.
Perfect.
And what does it mean to teach programming? I actually went back to university in the 90s. And it was a less than pleasant experience when I discovered that the professors at that point in time had little interest in how you coded. Just that you coded and got the right answer.
Okay.
And one of the things I did at Dawson was to make sure that wasn't how we taught programming.
Perfect. So thank you and see you next time.
My pleasure. Absolutely.